In this episode of Newscast, the BBC's daily news podcast, you're going to hear an in-depth conversation with a former world leader. It's Leo Varadkar, who was Taoiseach of Ireland twice, and crucially, he was running that country when they were engrossed in the Brexit negotiations between the UK and the EU, a period in which I hung on his every single word. So have a listen to my interview with Leo Varadkar. What's the word for a former Taoiseach?
Taoiseach.
Okay, I'm not going to try and pronounce that.
Just think of ear.
Okay. Also, can you give us the quintessential pronunciation of Taoiseach? I mean, I said it on the news hundreds and hundreds of times, and I was never quite convinced I was getting it right.
Yes, a Taoiseach.
Okay, it's hard.
But even a lot of people in Ireland wouldn't.
How do you feel? Look, it's interesting though, because obviously British people mispronounce your old job title all the time.
Of course, yeah.
Does it bother you? Because actually, I would also be bothered if I sort of tried to do it in a really Irish way, that I would sound a bit insulting too.
No, it doesn't bother me in the slightest. And I know sometimes Irish people can be critical when, people from other parts of the world can't say Taoiseach. But, I say to them, Gloucester, Cirencester,
Yeah.
Cholmondeley, all these very strange place names.
In both directions.
Yeah, so Ruislip, I don't know. So Irish people can't pronounce.
You got that one right, Ruislip.
Yes, but Irish people can't pronounce place names in England. Why should we expect English people to be able to pronounce Irish words? It's not reasonable.
Very fair, very fair. And the deputy, how do you say that?
Yes, that's Taoiseach.
Taoiseach.
So that the backdrop to it, which is a bit strange in a way, is our constitution was written in 1937 by Eamon de Valera. And titles like that were trendy at the time. So you Duce, Caudillo, Führer. But it was never a fascist thing.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the origin to it. And our constitution stuck. Before that, the title was President of the Executive Council.
Now, I promise we will talk about the entirety of your book in this conversation, but because this podcast started as Brexit cast, I thought I'd start with the Brexit bits. A meaningful period in both our lives.
Indeed, yeah.
So actually, before you became Taoiseach, and I was just reading Angela Merkel's book last week, so I've been reading a lot of political autobiographies this month. She says she tormented herself about whether there's more she could have done as Chancellor to give David Cameron a good deal so that maybe he would have won the referendum. Now, I know you weren't in charge at that point, but do you think she's got a point? Do you think actually maybe some more could have been done?
Well, the first thing that struck me about her biography was how little about Brexit is in there. It was such a big part of the lives of British and Irish politicians. I thought it was a bigger part of the lives of German politicians. Maybe it wasn't. I think it's a good practice, by the way, and a good intellectual practice to consider how you might have done things differently. So, possibly if they'd given David Cameron an emergency brake around migration, might the result have been different? I don't know. I've had that thought around our interactions with Prime Minister May.
Yeah.
One of the things that we considered was having a 10-year expiry on the backstop, and we did consider it. But then I'm not sure. I still don't think she would have got it through the House of Commons, and then it would have been a banked concession. And
I'm glad you mentioned that, because for me, that's the biggest revelation in the book, which tells you a bit about where my focus is, which is how seriously you did consider that option. So she was desperate for a way out of the backstop, and you seriously thought about saying, let's make it a time limited thing, because the public statement was always this has to be permanent.
Well, we're hardly going to say in a public statement that we're considering various options. Well, maybe you could, but we did consider it, and 10 years was quite short. Potentially considered a longer period as well. But the real, that could have suited in a way. It would have solved the problem for me anyway, and for Ireland for a period of time. And
it sort of worked on your planned electoral timetable as well.
But I suppose there are two major downsides. One, it still left Northern Ireland with a great degree of uncertainty. And I didn't want to do that to people in Northern Ireland, or at least the majority who didn't want Brexit at all. And then there was the doubt in our minds that, Prime Minister May, the Conservative Party was very divided. She wasn't really in control of it. Would this just be a banked concession and then we'd have to offer more?
Yeah. So I just wonder how like how finely balanced the judgment was? Was it like, oh, 50-50, we go for a time limit or not? Or actually, was it always quite an outside option?
It was never 50-50. I couldn't put a number on it, but it was never, it was never on the roll of the dice. It was something we considered, but I don't want to put a number on it. But
Sure.
you,
Exactly. How long is a piece of string anyway?
You get what I'm saying.
Yeah, but amazing to think. But and also because you say in the book earlier on that your strategy when it came to Brexit was to just be really honest and open and explicit in public, so that there was nothing that could leak or be spied on by the British. Yeah. But there's an example of something where actually we didn't know at the time how seriously you were toying with the idea of a time limit to the backstop.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and of course, bear in mind at the time, there was still potentially the prospect that there could be a second referendum or a confirmatory vote. And the best outcome for us always would have been for the UK to decide to stay in. And that seems ridiculous now, but there was a brief period, I think, when the Liberal Democrats were leading the polls and this actually looked like it could happen. Prime Minister Keir Starmer at the time came out very much in favour of a second referendum. And we didn't want to close off that possibility either.
Did you provide support to those people in British politics who wanted to reverse Brexit?
Not really. From time to time they would have contacted us, a couple of meetings, things like that. But we thought it better not to get involved in that. First of all, because it would be interference in British internal affairs. But then also, secondly, it just wouldn't have been smart. On Monday, trying to negotiate an agreement on Brexit with the UK government, on Tuesday meeting with their opponents who were trying to unravel it, and that wasn't something we thought was either smart or appropriate. But I remember meeting with Jeremy Corbyn when he was leader of Labour, and I had expected him to be across the issues in great detail, to really understand Northern Ireland and European affairs, and I was kind of surprised that he didn't really, which was again led me to believe that even if there had been a change of government, would we actually have been in a better place?
Interesting. And then there was a change of Prime Minister and Boris Johnson took over. And actually, you found yourself getting on quite well with him, even though you're quite different characters.
Yeah. Look, he's interesting. He's charming. He's funny. We both have an interest in the classics, although he actually studied it, not me. So he knows it better than me. And also, I think we were able to kind of just speak, person to person. We had each other's mobile numbers. Officials do not like this. Politicians and prime ministers speaking to each other without them in the room. But we were able to do that. And also, I definitely detected that he was more flexible or capable of greater flexibility than Prime Minister May. And also that he was more ruthless and was probably more able to push something through than she. So she had a lot of strengths, a very, very decent woman, very honourable woman, but probably not as ruthless as he. And that I think allowed him to push through an agreement that I think Prime Minister May would have struggled to.
And also, I love that you publish some of Boris Johnson's texts in the book, and you can see he speaks in text speak, and he doesn't finish his sentences, and he spells things wrongly all the time. So you're like, oh yeah, classic. That's exactly how I imagine Boris Johnson texts you.
Yeah, well, that's probably how I text people as well. So that goes back to the old Nokia era, when you even before predictive text messaging, for people who remember that.
And so the other interesting thing about when Boris Johnson takes over is you say explicitly in the book, because he was more ruthless, because he was more likely to be able to get a deal through his parliamentary party, that made you more willing to compromise.
Yes, not just that though. There was an electoral timeline unfolding as well. Elections were coming up here. Elections would have happened in Ireland. So I think both of us were keen to make sure that there was an agreement. Ultimately, Boris could have gone to the country with no deal, but he decided that was not the best option. And I wanted a deal as well because our government was a minority. It was starting to lose votes in Parliament. So, we were heading into elections as well. So it's the pressure of a deadline that often brings about an agreement. But also, I think sorry, that's what I'm trying to tell.
No, this is interesting because I remember all this stuff.
There's another factor as well.
Yeah.
That was very much at play at that time, but I can't.
Well, do you know what? That brings us on to the meeting that you had with Boris in that hotel in the Wirral, which was famously where
Thornton Manor, I think
where Colleen Rooney had her 21st,
Yeah.
which we trotted out endlessly as we were waiting for you guys to come out of your meeting. What clinched it there? Because you and he went for a walk in the gardens, just the two of you. And the situation looked really, really bleak. There was no way out, no room for compromise. And then you both left that hotel with a deal.
Yeah, so we had the walk and the talk in the garden, and then we actually had a one-to-one over tea in the house, and it was just the two of us for quite some time. And he made it very clear to me, you can say things, they call them tete-a-tetes in politics, and they're really important when they happen, because you can say things when it's just the two of you in the room and nobody else, and you've plausible deniability. You can have the kind of conversation that starts with, well, if I were to say X, might you say Y? And you just can't do that if there are other people in the room that might write it down or report it. So it was that kind of conversation. Sorry, I remember the second point now. What he was open to, which Prime Minister May was not open to, was separate arrangements for Northern Ireland.
Yeah. Because she'd said when the initial backstop was proposed, she'd said no British Prime Minister could sign up to this. That then led us to a UK-wide one, version of the backstop,
which wouldn't have been a bad outcome even now.
From your point of view,
I wonder, will someone ever dust that down again as the basis for a potential future relationship between the UK and the EU?
But basically, the clincher then with Boris Johnson was that he was prepared to go back to a Northern Ireland only arrangement, which had been so comprehensively rejected by May.
So I think that was they were the two fundamental factors. One, that he was willing to allow Northern Ireland to be treated separately from the rest of the UK in a way she wasn't, and then secondly, the pressure of deadlines, which always focuses minds.
And then you say in the book that once the Brexit deal is done, you're kind of like, you do a bit of a fist bump and you're like, right, my place in the history books is secure now. Does it still feel that way? Or actually does Brexit just feel like a weird, kind of almost like a weird fever dream that everyone's moved on from?
Yeah, look, that they say self-praise is no praise, and I don't like to be writing my own report card, but I'll be going to Belfast next weekend. And I will cross a border that barely exists. The only thing that is different is, the road signs change, and most of the signs aren't bilingual. That wasn't what the border was like when I grew up as a kid or a teenager at the end of the Troubles, but it is still like that now. And possibly that wouldn't have been the case, and maybe a different Taoiseach would have agreed to some sort of soft border. I was never going to do that.
Really? Would that have been acceptable to anyone from any political party in Ireland?
Who knows? Who knows?
I remember, this is such a trip down memory lane, but I remember when things were getting really dark and it looked like there wasn't going to be any kind of deal, speaking to an official in Brussels. And I said, what happens to Ireland if all of this falls apart? And they said, oh, we'll just have to cut them out of the single market. Like, was that something that you were seriously worried about?
Oh, like it was a genuine fear that our place in the European Union within the single market would be diminished in some way. That mainland European continental countries might say, oh, look, we can have a special arrangement for the Republic of Ireland, and they can have no checks between the UK and Ireland, but we could have checks on goods leaving, let's say, Dublin and Cork. That was definitely a fear that we had. It was never really put to us, or if it ever was, it would have been more at the level of a European Commission official, never at the kind of political level.
Because it would have been a scary thing to.
Yeah, it would have, and would have been a fear in the back of our minds that we'd be forced into some sort of halfway house or halfway membership.
Yeah, like a half Brexit for Ireland.
Yes, that was a real fear. And I remember having in the book a conversation I had with Andrej Plenković, who's the Prime Minister of Croatia, was then. And he said to me, I think it was in Davos, and he said to me, in the European Union, we're 27 member states. In theory, we're all equal. We all sit around the table. We all know that's not exactly true, that there's an executive floor. And sometimes the big countries go there and make a decision. And you have to just, you have to row in behind it or try and oppose it, but you're in a very weak position. And just be aware that someday, the French, the Germans, the British might go up to the executive floor and come up with a solution for us. And I did fear that, and that never arose. And I think that was in part out of solidarity for Ireland. It was in part out of a desire by other European countries not to encourager les autres, because if Britain got too good a deal, other countries might decide to leave. And it was also because in France, Germany, other countries, they also had Eurosceptic parties, and they didn't want to give them a boost. And one thing that's interesting across Europe, while we're seeing so-called far right, nationalist populist parties doing well, they've largely dropped their Eurosceptic ideas. You don't hear people talking about leaving the euro, or France or Italy leaving the European Union. They've pretty much dropped that, in part because Brexit is seen as not to have worked for the UK, but also because they're trying to move to the centre and win elections.
Also, that's interesting, that point you make about other countries didn't want Brexit to be a success to discourage Eurosceptics in their own countries. I mean, that was never really acknowledged, because whenever you'd say to other EU leaders or officials, oh, you want Brexit to be bad so that no one else does it, they always said, no, this is just like an orderly setting of the debt, settling of the accounts, sorting out legal certainty for our citizens. It's almost like a technical exercise. But actually, there was an element of, we've got to make this look really bad.
I think that was part of the subtext, that if Britain got too good a deal, and Brexit was seen to be a success, that other countries might follow. So that was definitely part of the subtext as to what was going on. But also there was realpolitik there too. The European Union is a club. It's a membership organisation. You pay a fee and you get a set of benefits. You couldn't have a situation whereby there's guest membership or associate membership, or you could somehow decide your fee and decide what benefits you have and what obligations you don't. So what there was a real desire to do, and we were very clear about this, was any sort of cherry picking, where you could say, I'll have those 3 aspects of membership, not those 3, and this is how much I'll pay. That could never have been the outcome.
Right. The thing about British politics is that you have been listening to it and watching it ever since you were a little kid, isn't it?
Yeah,
you were sat there in your bedroom listening to Radio 4 when you were like 10.
I know. It sounds a bit sad, and then there'd be the...
Not to me, it doesn't.
Then there'd be the shipping forecast, I think the national anthem, and then it would turn over to the World Service, which is just as interesting.
It's probably quite fun being in this building then, isn't it? Like as a BBC nerd from your youth. What were stories I don't know, 1992 when you would have been 13, like what were stories that you can remember now that were a big deal at Westminster?
Oh, probably the Maastricht Treaty, and John Major's attempts to stay in government, and the treacherous people who tried to undermine him, who at the time seemed to be quite radical, but actually now might seem a bit mainstream. But that's another day's work.
And so you were like glued to all of that.
I was definitely aware of it. I must have been a very sad child, really. But I would have listened to the day in Parliament. I was definitely very interested in British news. I think that's partially though because my dad's from India originally, came to England before he moved to Ireland. He moved to Ireland for my mum.
Yeah.
And at home, he would have taken an interest in the British news. We'd often watch the Irish news first, or for the first few minutes, and then switch over to the BBC. And I think one of the advantages the BBC has and UK broadcasters have is they have resources that broadcasters and media organisations in a small country like Ireland don't have. So you're able to do international coverage on a level that's very difficult for Ireland. And as somebody who was interested in this bigger, wider world out there, what was I going to do? It was going to be BBC, Channel 4, Radio Sweden, whoever had information for me.
Right. Yeah, I was amazed that you tuned into Swedish radio as well.
I don't know if they still have an English service, but they did. They did back then.
And then that turns into like a real drive and ambition to get to the top of politics, which basically kind of like takes up all your free time because you're also training to be a doctor at the same time.
Yeah, so free time was limited, but it did take up all of my free time. And I remember doing things that would have been pretty crazy, staying up till 3 or 4 a.m. replying to emails from constituents and turning up late for work or late for the ward round. There certainly was a period of maybe 2 or 3 years where I really felt I was doing a half-arse job of both, that I wasn't the doctor that I should have been, and wasn't able to be the local councillor and politician that I wanted to be. So that just came to a crunch point where I couldn't do both anymore. But I did manage to finish my training as my specialist training as a GP as well. And the scheme who ran all that were really good to me in terms of giving me extra time to finish my courses and so on, which was very helpful.
And you actually had your eye on the prize of being Taoiseach like quite early on, didn't you?
Well, definitely, as young as kind of 7 or 8, the book starts with me walking down to the polling station, my mum, to cast her vote, and seeing the posters and being really transfixed by the idea that an election could turn everyday people into people of power and influence. So definitely at that age was interested in becoming a politician, running for election. Didn't know necessarily where it would take me. But like once you start on a pyramid, you may as well try and get to the top. And thankfully, through a combination of luck and hard work, I got there.
What is also quite intriguing about the book is you're quite honest about how brutal politics has to sometimes be, and like you end up falling out with really good friends, or you have to fire somebody who you really liked, or you basically have to stab your leader in the back. And like, for example, like the paragraph when you explain what you didn't like about Enda Kenny, your predecessor, when he was party leader, it's quite brutal.
Well, there's all the stuff I like as well.
No,
there too. So
of course. I mean, and that's the stuff that we see all the time when you're being colleagues and friends and allies. But actually, what is it you say about him? Like he's very good at like slapping backs and smiling, but you're not sure there's anything there.
Yeah, but that's also a criticism of me, because I was terrible at that. I liked debate. I liked being in studio on the media, performing in the Dáil in Parliament. I liked policy. I liked subcommittee meetings, and it was a more natural politician in terms of, pressing the flesh, beating people. So that was, that was also a criticism of me, if that makes any sense. And I
see that.
I found that hard, and I had to learn that, and I got way better at it as the years went by. But you're either natural at that or you're not. Yeah,
and you talk about getting your junior ministers to go and do all the visits. Because you just didn't fancy doing that.
Oh no! That's I did them all, and I made a point of getting to.
True. Sorry, I've exaggerated.
Yeah.
You do. There is a line in the book where you say you knew that your colleagues liked that stuff better.
Yes, yeah, but one thing I think probably happens here in the UK as well. What they talk about is being London centric. This happens in Ireland as well, where often politicians are accused of being Dublin centric, particularly if they're from Dublin, as I am. And one thing I would have always said to my ministers and junior ministers is to realise that there's more to Dublin than central Dublin, and to get out into the suburbs and the postcodes that you haven't heard of, like Dublin 24 and Dublin 13 and so on. And that was kind of my response in some ways to the view that I was too Dublin centric. But I went out of my way to make sure I got all around the country, and I got to every county at least once a year, if not twice.
And also you write about how you became kind of less of a Rottweiler, as you went up the ladder.
Well, I think more and more I became the prey, So I remember complaining one day to a journalist who I was semi-friendly with, about the hard time I was getting, and she said to me, like, "What do you expect? You're the man with the ball. Like, of course we're going to tackle you." So I guess before I was the person tackling the men and women with the ball, and when you hold high office, then you're the person who is under attack. So it puts you in a very different position.
And also, you were becoming a bit more kind of socially liberal as well.
Yeah.
Just explain that journey.
Yeah, like that's a very personal one. I know some people take the view. Like I was never a hardline social conservative. Now, like that isn't the case. But I would have been sort of mainstream conservative on social issues, and ended up very much on the social liberal side of the spectrum in terms of people's personal freedoms and personal lives. And I know some of my critics would say that this was just me going with the wind or going with the polls, and it really wasn't. And it had a lot to do with me sort of coming out to myself as a gay man. And I do see a pattern of young gay men who aren't out yet, who can be very socially conservative. And I think when you're closeted and you're forced to be very disciplined, and forced to conform to what you believe to be social norms, it's easier for you to demand that other people should do so as well. And once I stopped doing that, things were less black and white. The world was way more grey. I was much more willing to accept the idea that good people do bad things and bad people do good things. And it certainly wasn't for me to impose my kind of moral thoughts or values to the extent that I had any at that stage, or I shouldn't say had any, but sense that they were formed at that stage on other people.
Yeah. Interesting. And then, of course, you meet Matt, your partner, and actually you've got this amazing combination of a really high-powered job, but also being a bit like a teenager at the same time. I mean, what was that like, having those two two things?
That's when I kind of got a life, yeah. But look, I always
less Swedish radio being listened to then.
Well, look, I always did have a life, though, but my social circle was politics, political people who are involved in the party, and that's very unhealthy. Actually, it's a really good idea for politicians to have a social circle that is separate from politics, that isn't all that interested in it. And I was lucky that I kind of built that, both with a newer set of friends, but also with Matt, and that definitely gave me a different perspective on life. Still love the job, still very aware what a privilege it is to hold high political office, but also more and more aware that there's more to life, that you only get one, and you should really try and make the most of it.
And we'll talk about your decision to step down in a second, but I'm quite aware we've not really talked about any kind of big policy issues from your time in office. So let's run through them quite quickly now. Why, and this is a ridiculous way of posing this question, why has Ireland got such a big housing problem? What are the roots of that?
Yeah, well, we don't have enough houses. You can make it.
To that question.
You can make it a lot more complicated than that. But we've a rising population. When I was in school, not that long, well, it was 20 years ago, whatever. But anyway, I remember for a very long time we used to always say the population of the Republic of Ireland is 3.5 million, and it was for a long time. It's now 5.6 and rising. So a big increase in population, a big increase in incomes as well, and a prolonged period of inadequate building of new houses of all types, social, private, you name it, after the financial crash that we still haven't managed to get on top of. And it's a major problem. It's created huge intergenerational injustice, and drives a lot of the divisions in our society. It's not unique to Ireland. There's a housing crisis here, particularly in the south of England. There is in all the places Irish people go to, like Australia, New York, Vancouver, even Berlin, Barcelona. But it's been going on for a long time, and we, despite a lot of good things we have done, we haven't managed to get on top of it. Like during my period in government, we quadrupled the number of new homes being built, but it's still deficient to where we need to be.
Immigration, Ireland's always been a very welcoming country, but yet now you get the same tensions in Ireland that you get in lots of Western European countries. There was even an anti-immigrant riot in Dublin while you were in charge. How do you address that?
Well, look, we're a normal country, so there is racism and there's anti-immigrant sentiment, and not everyone who's anti-immigration is racist, but quite a number are. I think we are in a better place though than most countries. There's no significant far-right party in our parliament as of yet. There's certainly nobody saying that there should be no immigration. There's an understanding in Ireland, perhaps driven by our own history, that people leave their country for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes they're fleeing persecution. We had the penal laws for quite some time, discrimination against Catholics, and also people leave for a better life, and also people come home again. So I think the idea of migration is probably more wired into our national story than might be the case.
Philosophically, it's a different kind of phenomenon.
Yeah, it's a different thing. But at the same time, the numbers have been really high in the last couple of years, and that has put services and housing and lots of things under pressure, and people are asking the question, how can we control things better? And they expect their government to be able to manage these things better. What I often say to people though is that it's not like a tap with hot and cold. You can't just. People think it's much easier to modulate the volume and the composition of migration than is actually the case. Push factors are huge.
Because you've got free movement from the EU,
yeah,
and also people have got the right to arrive and claim asylum, and you can't control who arrives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell, and the right from the UK as well. Of course, every UK citizen is also allowed to live and work and study in Ireland freely, and vice versa. And nobody wants to change that, by the way. I think, though, as is probably the case in a lot of countries, including here, the main difficulty that a lot of people have is with the asylum system. They see that a large number of people are using the asylum, the international protection system, to get around the rules. Could have applied for a work permit or a work visa, but didn't, and arrive in the country, and that system isn't working. It's not working here in Ireland, across Europe.
Do you think we should revisit the Refugee Convention?
I do. Not with a view to preventing refugees from coming to Europe, but when that was written, it was written for a different world where travel across borders was extremely difficult. The Iron Curtain was in the way, and you didn't have easy airline travel in the way that you have now. It wasn't designed for the world that we now live in, and we also live in a world of 8 billion people. I think there was 2 or 3 back then, so it's just a lot more people. But I don't think that's the comprehensive response. You have to ask, what are the push factors? Why are huge numbers of people willing to risk crossing the Mediterranean, willing to risk crossing the Channel in small boats, willing to save up as a family to send one person ahead, and that person may never come back. And that's to do with all of the other things that are happening in the world. Things like climate change, which is driving migration. The civil war in places like Syria, the collapse of states like Libya, which used to be a barrier to migration. And if you're just dealing with the factors around your own country or your own island, you can never succeed. We have to double down and get back to dealing with some of those global issues, like climate, like instability.
In the meantime, as we try and solve climate change and world peace, do we then have to basically change our international treaties about refugees? How do you rewrite it?
Yeah, look, I haven't sat down with a group of clever people to rewrite them. So
that's what we've been using your retirement for.
I'm not going to give you a half thought through answer.
No, but it's interesting though, because I would have thought from your background and your country, you'd be like, no, all that stuff is sacrosanct. We have those laws for a reason. They were drafted after the Holocaust. Never again. But actually, the fact that you're entertaining the idea of a rewriting of those things, I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, like why should any document written by human beings be sacrosanct? These are written by people with the right intentions at a point in time, and if international treaties and international conventions aren't working for us anymore, well then you update them, you amend them. So that would be my view on it. But again, not with a view to preventing refugees who need to come to the West, but preventing it from being what it is now is an roundabout means to get into a country for economic reasons. Not in all cases, but in a lot.
I'll let you off for not having a fully worked out draft for the new refugee convention. That is fine. You've been writing a book instead.
Now the book's finished, I might get started on that.
And so then the moment you decide to start, so you then become Taoiseach for the second time, and it just doesn't seem like as fun or as fulfilling anymore. When was the moment you're like, oh yeah, this is my dream job, but it's actually not anymore?
Well, I did go back in at the start of my second term, very committed, very ambitious, really wanted to double down on solving problems. I was hoping that I'd be able to lift my party towards another election victory. So, I didn't go in with, a bad attitude. I went in serious about the job, wanting to do it, determined that I could do a better job than I did the first time, having learned from the first time. It's difficult to know when I kind of felt that things weren't working out. Definitely at a certain point, I don't know, maybe 6 months into it, I kind of felt that initiatives were landing flat. People, or a large section of the public, weren't listening to what I said anymore. And it was therefore much harder to get things done that I wanted to get done. In politics, we often talk about political capital. And when you have a lot of political capital, you can get a lot of things done just through the force of your popularity or personality or whatever. That can become very difficult. And I see that now with the position your own Prime Minister Keir Starmer's in at the moment. It's very hard for him to do things now because of the weak position that he's in with his party and the polls. It makes it very hard to take risks, for example. So at a certain point, I kind of had to start to make a calculation as to whether my party might be better off with a new leader. And that's a hard thing to admit to yourself or accept to yourself, but I did. And we were coming into local and European elections, so that was a trigger in some ways. But if I was still loving it, I probably would have tried to hang on for ever. Because if you love something,
Yeah.
every day's a bonus, isn't it? But I wasn't feeling like that. So it genuinely was a combination of my own kind of personal headspace that I was in, but also a feeling that I was past my peak in terms of what I could deliver on politically, and that's hard to admit to yourself.
And then there's a conversation you have with Jacinda Ardern
Yeah,
New Zealand about you either leave office because you quit, you lose, or you die.
Yeah, no, she's a great thinker, and I see her a bit in Harvard, where we're both fellows. Although I think she's moved to the UK now, but I'm not sure if that's happened yet. But yeah, she was in Dublin speaking at an event. Didn't ask to see me, and I kind of rang her up and said, come into the office. She didn't want to bother me because she's a former prime minister, and I was too busy as sitting prime minister. I said, no, come in, and we had a great chat. But one of the things she said to me, in her mind, was how it helped, and she helped to crystallise it in my mind. Three ways to go as a prime minister: die, lose, or resign. And if you're not going to die, if you don't want to lose, then it's resign, and then it's whether it's your decision or one that gets forced on you.
Yeah.
And that kind of really crystallized it in my mind.
I mean, it'll be so interesting in 25 years' time when the historians really get their teeth into this period. And there's this sort of moment when she resigns, and that idea goes viral around world leaders, and loads of you decide to call it quits. So it's actually historians will pinpoint her as the quitting influencer.
But I remember, I remember listening to her press conference in its entirety. Nicola Sturgeon's as well.
Yeah.
Similar but different. And I suppose there haven't been a huge number of examples of that. Sean Lemass in my own country was somebody who resigned at his own time, but he was much older.
Talking about Nicola Sturgeon, she was sat in that very chair a few weeks ago when she was promoting her book as well. And she says, I reckon in a few decades' time, we'll have a united Ireland, an independent Scotland, home rule for England, and there'll be a sort of federation of the British Isles. What do you think about that concept?
We don't like to use the term British Isles for a start, as you probably know. I'm
not sure if does she use the British Isles? Maybe I'm not.
That actually came up when she was in Dublin, and the alternative term, which isn't much better, is the Celtic Archipelago.
Yeah, what?
I know.
I've heard anyone call it that.
Or Britain and Ireland. Look, nobody can predict the future, and I can't either. I don't know what Scotland's going to do. That's up to them, obviously. But I do think. And I don't think it's inevitable by any means, but I do think in a number of decades, I don't know how many, a united Ireland is more probable than not. And that's driven by a number of things. But in particular, demographics. If you look at the numbers, those under 40, particularly those under 35, heavily favour unification. And I don't see why that won't carry through as they get older. And then we get into a situation, and this is what the Good Friday Agreement provides for, which is unification of the island by consent by majorities on both sides of the border wanting it. And I think we should prepare for that.
And did you, I dimly remember from the Brexit times, did you start a process of kind of a conversation about what a united Ireland would look like?
I didn't, and I didn't for a particular reason. So when I got in...
That's me massively misremembering that then. Okay.
Well, when I got in 2017, when I became Taoiseach, I had in my mind sort of 4 steps. First, we needed to have an agreement on Brexit. Second, we needed to get the institutions in Stormont in Northern Ireland up and running again, because they collapsed. Sinn Féin actually had brought them down at that stage over a cash for ash scandal. The third was to get this whole idea of a shared island unit going, and got that started. And although in fairness, Micheál Martin really put the impetus behind that, but it was part of my agenda as well. And then when all that was up and running, the fourth thing was going to be some sort of convention or forum on the future constitutional status of Ireland. We'd had them in the past, in the 1980s, for example. But I really thought you couldn't do that until we had an agreement on Brexit,
right,
and the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement were functioning. I did not think it would take 6 or 7 years for that to happen. And bear in mind, it was February 2024, only a month or so before I resigned. Like, that was when we got the institutions up and running again.
Yeah. But you think they should get going with that now? It'd be prudent.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be now, as in next month.
Right.
But I, if not now, when? Because we have an agreement on Brexit, and the relationship between Ireland and the UK is reset and is back to some form of normal again. The Good Friday Agreement institutions, power sharing, Stormont are functioning. So it would seem now to be a good time to convene a forum on what a united Ireland might look like. And one thing that we've definitely learned, I think, from the Brexit referendum here is that whenever we put this question to the Irish people, that we should be able to answer all their questions. I actually had this conversation with Nicola when she's in Dublin a few weeks ago, that part of the reason why she feels they lost the referendum was not being able to answer some of the reasonable questions that people had about what independence really meant. So we need to answer that.
And she wrote a massive white paper answering 600 questions, and her leader, Alex Salmond, at the time didn't even read it, which was an interesting bit of her book. Right, just before you go, I know you're a big pop fan. There was the story about you writing to Kylie Minogue.
Yes, indeed.
You got papped when you were at the Mighty Hoopla, where I was actually there too, but I didn't see you there in 2021. Have you got Ariana Grande tickets?
I don't. No. Next up is...
Apparently there were 2 million people in the queue.
Yeah, no, I didn't even try. So, next up for me is Katy Perry. So I'll be
when do you sing her?
I think it's next weekend after next in Belfast. So,
I'm seeing her in London. Love Katy Perry. What's your favourite Katy Perry song?
Probably Firework.
Oh, me too. Yeah. Yes. Have you got plans for when Taylor Swift's album comes out? You don't seem like a Swiftie, actually.
I am a Swiftie. I love her stuff. Saw her in Dublin. But I'm not like up to date on what's happening on a day-to-day
Life of a
basis.
showgirl.
I know she's got engaged and all the rest of it. Is it not out already?
No.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe former world leaders get like a sneak preview.
If it came out, I would know. Yeah.
And last question, have you still got your disco ball lamp that you ordered off Instagram and then sparked a massive security scare in the government buildings?
I sure do.
Anyway, it's been lovely to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.